Politics and the economy are inevitably wedded, with one influencing the other. Arguably, when political structures are strong, business and the economy stand a greater sporting chance of booming. This reciprocal relationship finds added shine during elections. How do business and the economy dictate politics and legislation? How does politics affect business and the economy? Under the Aquino administration, the stock exchange, a barometer of business confidence, has become a world top performer, with the physics breaking records well over a dozen times since the start of the year. The Philippines has posted phenomenal region-leading economic growth. And in particular, the symbiotic relationship between business and the economy and politics is at its best when the labor sector becomes a happy beneficiary. Is that happening now? In an environment of stunning economic progress, the pressure to foster inclusive growth is hotter than ever. Will the midterm elections be a turning point in job creation? The 2013 midterm polls are shaping up to be an exciting one. I'm Nancy Irlanda, and this is Elections 2013. Tonight, we talk about the relationship of business and politics, as well as job creation and productivity. Joining us tonight, UP School of Economics Professor Stella Kimbo, Tony Lopez, publisher of Biz News Asia, and Raymond Lacdao. He's consultant with the Business Process Outsourcing Association of the Philippines. Thank you all for joining us this evening.
You too. Yeah.
All right, Professor, I get to ask the questions tonight. What is the correlation of politics and economics?
Well, the simplest link is election spending and GDP, right? So candidates have to spend a whole lot of money on ads, on campaign materials, on, of course, they have to hire a lot of workers. And so employment figures really spike up shortly on election year.
That's the literal correlation.
Yes,
okay.
yes. And of course, well, the second link is really your political business cycles, where your macroeconomic indicators like unemployment rate or inflation rate, they tend to be better shortly before elections.
Okay.
Right? And then, of course, third would be your politicians making economic promises. And when they make good on their economic promises, then you would see economic effects. So maybe perhaps, for example, Pinoy promised to win the daan and seems to be making some headway, and then we're seeing some effects.
All right. Tony has something to say about tuwid na daan, but for you, what is the
The
correlation?
correlations that there are only 100 families in the Philippines that control the politics and business of this country. Politics makes good business, and business makes good politics. That's why you see the same people in politics and in business. So this is a very elitist society, and the so-called democratic participation is more sham than real.
I guess that's a golden rule, Nance.
Right. If you take off your economist hat for a moment and just an observer, what is the correlation?
I would say the golden rule. He who has the gold rules.
Yeah.
All right. And he who has the BPOs, your neck of the woods. How do you think politics correlates to your industry?
Well, right now we're feeling the effects of politics and business getting together in a good situation right now. So driving the economy right now is the BPO, and we did generate 20% growth in 2012. That number would not happen if the politicians did get their acts together and support what we needed to have to increase the numbers that we have for the industry.
All right. All right. In
terms of
yes.
anecdotal evidence, no, election spending increases the revenues and profits of TV stations by about 30%. And the country has about 3.2 trillion in savings. It's about 3,200 pesos per capita. And usually also, when there is an election, there's more kidnapping, there's more bank robbery to raise money for election spending.
So, well, the unemployment rate goes down because there's more people being employed as robbers.
No, the unemployment rate
Thieves.
goes up. The employment rate goes up because people are being employed. Can you imagine there are about 42,000 precincts or barangays, and each of them must be manned by, but the two biggest parties, 3 people on a 24-hour basis for 3 days during the counting. But the PCOS should put some people out of business and out of employment, because within 24 hours, you get the results.
That's true.
Yeah.
Well, that should be a good thing, right? But bad thing for labor.
Yeah.
Is labor being taken care of by way of existing bills in the pipeline in both both the upper and lower chamber?
I think that the formally employed and those earning wages are generally okay, meaning you have the minimum wage law. Well, of course, there's this criticism that the coverage is very limited. There's also this problem of compliance, meaning because it's very difficult to monitor 281 minimum wages across the regions, across different sectors. Compliance is about just 80%.
All right.
So, but the problem really is the informally employed.
Yes.
So I worry about them because
Do they have safety nets? What is there to protect them by way of legislation now?
Well, right now I know that there's a bill pending in Congress. It's the bill on security of tenure. So it tries to extend the privileges of regular workers to the contractuals. But well, currently it's still pending.
All right, wages are one thing. There's also non-wage benefits. What
Yeah,
can you say
first
about
of all,
how?
there are about 11 million Filipinos who are either unemployed or underemployed.
Underemployed.
As regards safety net, their safety net is a relative abroad. One out of every three households in the Philippines has a relative abroad working as an expat, not an OFW. Expat, they're very, in the very real sense, expat rates, which is a higher category of skill and professionalism.
All right, when it comes to BPOs.
Yes.
The BPO industry is not formally incorporated yet or covered in the labor code, but there are amendments. Your thoughts on the status
Yeah,
of
actually,
this?
though we're not covered by that, we one of the things that we tell our investors or the BPO firms here is that they have to abide by the labor code. Actually, they have to surpass what they can give, because one of the things that we're trying to attract is people to the industry. Unfortunately, until now, even if we have 770,000 workers in the industry right now, we're trying to attract more. Our goal is to have by 2016, 1.3 million employees, and that's about 140,000 jobs until 2016.
And the nature of these jobs
Yes.
are mostly contractual.
No, actually, right now, what we're trying to do is have to tell them that there's actually a career that they can have in the
Okay.
industry. So we do have examples right now of people who started as agents 10 years ago who are now country managers of their firms.
Working their way up.
Yes.
All right.
And in terms of the benefits themselves, we try to give more than what's minimum. So right now, you will see that the centers right now would take care of their health care. They will also have transportation available, especially if they work at night. They actually have, if you visit one of the firms that have big centers, they have their own gyms, their own massage places, everything to make them relax more, because it's a very stressful environment.
You've begun to raise an important point, which is that the BPO industry is almost an entirely different animal in the sense that there are very different demands on the quality of work life.
Yes.
There's the night shift, the swing shift, and all that.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, this one issue has come to the fore, that there is a developing brain drain when it comes to the local BPO
Right.
industry, because some of our locals would rather work abroad, number one, because of perhaps better pay, number two, because the time zones, let's say in countries like Australia or New Zealand, are closer to the time zones of the Western countries that these call centers or BPOs serve.
Actually, one of the things that we're trying to do right now is to market the different countries that we traditionally serve, which is the US, which is totally night shift. Right now, the countries that we're serving are UK, which is mid shift, and Australia, which as you mentioned, which is day shift. So right now, the agent or the employee can have a choice of what shift they want to take. So it's not totally night shift. So right now, we actually serve these countries on a 24/7 environment. So if you're the agent, you can actually choose now. If you're tired of the night shift, you can go to the day shift.
All right. Stella, you began to talk about legislation that has to do with wage. I wanted to just expand that further, and same thing I asked Tony here. How about the non-wage benefits? What do you see in the pipeline, or what do you want to see that's not yet in the pipeline in terms of legislation?
Well, there are many laws that actually provide social protection for our workers, meaning you have the law that created the PhilHealth.
PhilHealth, okay.
You have Pag-ibig, you have GSIS, and all other social security programs. But I think the problem really has to do with implementing the programs really well. For example, PhilHealth, the amount of protection that they give is just 8%. For every 100 pesos that you spend, on the average, you just get 8 pesos worth of protection from PhilHealth. And so, of course, we know, I mean, in the context of the Philippines, bawal magkasakit, right?
Yeah.
So, and simply means that getting sick can actually drive you to poverty. You sell your assets, you borrow money and all that. So that's the kind of protection that we
The
need for
unforeseen
yeah.
events. Yes, absolutely. The 125 across the board wage increase, is that reasonable? It's already passed the House committee level. How close do you think that is to becoming a law? Pinoy already said that 125 pesos across the board is going to be harmful to the economy.
Well, firstly, the minimum wage the Philippines is one of the few countries in Asia with a minimum wage law. When you have an oversupply of labor by about 11 million, you cannot make it work. Because a guy who wants to work at 350, which is below minimum wage, cannot be taken in because the employer will violate the law. So what happens?
But that guy just wants work and wants to be paid.
Yeah.
It's ironic.
And also maybe instead of minimum wage, we should give them transportation benefits because transportation, I noticed, takes up 1/3 of a daily wage. Ang layo saka ang traffic, saka wala talagang available transportation. So those benefits should be put into the law rather than the minimum wage.
Do you see,
there's a building boom. Ang daming construction workers, they are not covered by minimum wage. Pababa ng rate
they're
yan.
informal workers, as you were saying.
And I think only about 10% of the labor force is unionized. Yeah, and I think also the same ratio applies to SSS membership.
Do you see that there's any hope in the horizon that perhaps we can do away with this minimum wage legislation?
No, politicians being what they are, we will always have a minimum wage and benefits legislation every year.
To pander to the labor sector.
And also, we are now suddenly competitive. No? Kala ko dati that because the peso appreciated from 56 pesos to 41.
Yeah. Or
That's
now below
more than
40.
20%
Below 41,
appreciation.
I mean. Yes.
Meaning to say, yung profit ng mga BPO naubos.
Yes.
But Indonesia increased their wages by 60% in the last 2 years. 60% in the last 2 years. Tayo, hindi naman tayo masyado nag-increase. Diba?
Yes.
Magkano yung increase?
But yeah, I was going to
Actually-
ask by way of industry standard,
Right.
what would you call a minimum wage in the BPO
Right
industry?
now, though,
Entry level.
the entry level right now is, of course, definitely above minimum wage.
Of course, yes. But what are we looking at?
We're looking about 16,000 to 18,000.
Okay.
In Metro Manila, of
Right.
course, in the provinces, it gets lower. But on top of that, on the monetary benefits, we have the non-monetary benefits. You mentioned earlier about the transportation.
Yes.
Malaking bagay sa kanila.
The companies, the BPOs, provide that already for the companies, especially.
How about healthcare?
Healthcare as well.
By way of how?
One of the things that we advise to the investors that come to the country that set up shop here is the minimum healthcare that they can give, which is to the employee. And some of them who are generous enough would actually extend that to the family members. So they have that as an option as well. And more often than not, the members or the investors or the companies that set up here would do that because that's one way for them to attract the employees to the company. Because if they're no different from the traditional companies or the banks here, there's really no reason for them to move to a BPO,
Sure.
which right now we
Which
are
is-
always advising them. You have to do better than the traditional companies,
The
and that's
traditional
working
employers.
for them. That's working for them.
Yeah.
And these investors right now would need those employees to do the work for the international market.
Okay, we're going to pick up on this conversation, but for now we're going to have to go to a break. More issues about business, politics, and labor. Stay tuned. This is Elections 2013. Welcome back. You're still watching Elections 2013, and we are in the run-up to the midterm elections. Do you see any labor platforms being advanced by the current crop of candidates in the midterm
It's not
elections?
a labor platform per se, but it's the economic platform. If you elect the senators of Pinoy, that means consistency of policy at the legislative, judiciary, in sync with the executive. That means he will be able to carry out his projects, his PPP, what other incentives he wants to give the investors and businesses.
So indirectly,
So indirectly,
more business will generate more
I
employment,
think
ideally.
Ideally, you should vote majority of the Pinoy team para he can control the Senate. Although the Senate, as it is already very docile, he can control the House, which is even more docile than a dog. Yeah.
All right, your take.
I think
Platforms that address labor.
a number
Anyone
of-
talking about it? I mean, in the campaign?
A number of candidates have been talking about job creation.
Alan Peter Cayetano, Pitik.
Or Mrs.
Villar,
Villar.
Hanep
And-
Buhay.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
But I think the question really is not just job creation per se, but the right jobs. We have to create the right jobs, right? Meaning, right now, there's a lot of people unemployed, but ironically, 2 out of 5 firms would say that there are job vacancies. So the problem really is that there are many positions that are hard to fill. So the skills don't match the jobs that are available. So people like Sani Angara who are promoting education, I think that's also a platform for jobs.
Yeah,
And
it's a springboard for
absolutely.
employment.
So yeah, so because the problem really is that our labor productivity levels are just so low.
Yeah, I agree with the professor, and actually that's the concern that we have in the industry. We always say we have about 481,000 graduates every year. When an investor looks at that number, it's staggering. But when they drill down and see how many people are
Are
qualified
competent.
Yeah.
for the jobs that they need,
Sadly,
it's only about 15%.
15%.
15%.
That's sad.
But right now, the government as well as the private sector is doing something about it. So they have put together a lot of finishing schools or finishing programs to ensure that that quality of graduates that we have is up to par for what the companies need.
All right, this episode is
To me,
honing.
the
Yes.
best platform is an investment platform to harness the Philippine money. Ang daming pera ng Philippines sa kanang Pinoy. 85 billion in
In
reserves, $22 billion in remittances.
We can pay our debt, 62 billion, right?
$13 billion income from BPO. We don't need a credit rating upgrade kasi hindi naman tayo nangungutang. We have 85 billion.
But
Ang utang
ironically,
lang
the
natin
US is AAA investment grade, but they can pay their debt. We
We
can
don't-
pay our
hindi
debt
naman
with their
tayo kailangan
reserves, right?
mangutang eh. Dapat nga ba, we can pay in one blow our $62 billion debt. Ayaw natin.
All right, there's been record-breaking.
So if
yes.
there's a guy who can present, how can we harness that kind of money? In addition, there is in the central bank 1.5 trillion pesos idle money deposited by commercial banks. And another, we have a savings rate, as I have said, of 3.2 trillion pesos. Nakatiwangwang yan. Kaya ang nakikinabang lang yan, sina Henry C., sina Jonggo Kungwei, sina Andrew Tan, yung mga may malls. Kasi pupunta lang sa spending. Pero mo, in economic theory, kung may savings, dapat may investment. Kung may investment, you create jobs. Wala eh. In the third quarter of 2012, the highest growth rate was 7.2%, diba, GDP. And yet in the same quarter, almost 1 million jobs were lost.
All right, I'm glad you raised that point because in the third
Because
quarter,
normally,
third quarter
yeah.
of 2012,
Normally, when the economy grows by 7%,
Yes.
correct me
Which
the
we did
economy,
in
the economy should
2012.
create 1 million jobs. Yan ang level ng growth rate that creates one, and yet you lose 1 million jobs. That means you lost twice. You did not create 1 million jobs, you lost another
1 million
million.
ba talaga? Because if I read your magazine,
Yeah.
Business Asia,
Yeah.
of course, right?
Actually, it's
you're talking about 882,000.
yeah,
See, it's
yeah.
I've
By
memorized it.
today, that will be 1 million
Let's
jobs.
say, okay, Professor Stella. Okay, what he's saying is that in the third quarter of 2012, we registered phenomenal growth of 7.1%. But at that very same time,
7 no, kinorek nila eh.
all right,
Tinaas ang
7.2%. But at the
Diba?
very same time, we registered supposedly job losses in the staggering number of 882,000 jobs lost. Can you put that in perspective for us?
All right, it would appear that it's jobless growth, but just looking at the statistics, we found out quite recently that it's actually a statistical error. So in 2011, as a result of a rider, an ILO rider on the
International
Force
Labor
Survey,
Organization.
yes,
Okay.
on the the NSO ran an ILO rider on October 2011, and what happened was that it
redefined
It, yes, redefined
the term employment.
right? In which case, the number of employed in October 2011 was actually overstated,
Spiked.
spiked.
Okay.
Right?
Let's hear this out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so which means that if you ignore the 2011 mistake and you simply look at October 2010 and October 2012, there was actually an increase in jobs of 1.5 million.
Okay.
So in my mind, there's no jobless growth, which reminds me, the more technical explanation I think is going to be uploaded onto the NSO website.
Oh, okay. So we're going to have official word.
I
That
think
it's
so,
because of
yes.
this redefinition
Yes,
of
yes.
employment
Well-
that would seem to have pointed
Yes.
to a loss in jobs.
Yeah.
But now that they redefined it to the old definition of 2010, in 2012 we should be seeing that.
Yes, in fact, I think
A more
an
accurate
announcement will be
reflection.
made tomorrow. The
Oh, okay.
January 2013 labor figures will be out tomorrow.
So we jumped the
Ako
gun.
naman,
Will I read that in Business
Yung
Asia?
redefinition, panahon pa ni GMA yan. Sinasabi nila, a person is unemployed if he has no job and is actively looking for a job.
I remember that.
Oh.
Yes, but
Kaso
you know,
inalis
but-
nila yung kuletilya na actively.
Yeah.
So, wala kang trabaho, pero dahil frustrated ka na sa kakahanap, lakad ka na lakad araw-araw, wala kang trabaho, hindi ka na-counted na part of the labor force. In fact, they manipulated the labor participation rate
All right.
by about 6 percentage points. Di ba,
But okay,
Professor? Oh. So that,
Well, this
so that they understated the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate is more than 7%, but in the official rate, it's only 6.9%. Because they manipulated the labor participation rate. Halimbawa, 40 million ng labor force. Sasabihin nila, 30 million lang dapat ng participation. Doon nila binis ngayon yung unemployment rate.
All right.
But
I'd like,
the
yes.
redefinition happened
Final word on that,
Di ba,
Debater.
Professor?
The redefinition happened in 2004.
Oh, yan.
So,
Ma-
and
mas
as a
matagal na pala
result,
yun.
the
Lumang storya na yun.
the double-digit unemployment rate during Germany's time actually went down to single-digit. But it has been
It went down from 12 to
But-
7.
It has been consistently used since 2004. So the figures for 04 up to today are actually comparable.
Actually,
Alright,
the figures that you should use, yung SWS, consistently since 2005, ang unemployment rate is 20%. 20%. Kung bumaba man lang yan, hindi bababa ng 18. 1 out of every 5 able-bodied Filipino, meaning 15 years and above, is unemployed. That's a very high rate. Actually, sa ibang country, magre-revolution ang mga tao pag ganyan ang unemployment rate mo.
They should
Okay,
actively.
let me bring it back again to the
Yeah.
most basic question. How do we lower the unemployment rate?
Well, I was going to say, maybe they can just apply it to the BPO sector. Because every company right now, and we did a survey last quarter, 91% of those people that answered our surveys are looking for employment. They need
Actually, sa BPO,
they need the people
excuse me,
already.
Ang baba ng hiring rate nila, for every 100 applicants, swerte na 10 ma-hire doon.
Kasi nga, when
Kasi-
they look at the educational
Yes.
Kulang sa
profile, they don't pass
qualification, sa
musters.
educational attainment.
Yes.
Dapat siguro we should conduct voice classes nationwide sa
But
barangay.
one of
Kasi
the
yun ang
things-
hinahabol nila, boses.
You're already talking about the voice sector, and that's one of the sectors in the BPO. There's other sectors right now that we are promoting, and if you look at the growth of these sectors, they're bigger than the call center growth. You're looking at finance and accounting, the non-voice sector, finance and accounting, legal processing.
Medical
We're hiring
transcription.
accountants. We are hiring lawyers. We're hiring architects, engineers already, and nurses and doctors. These are already the higher
And
value
also the
work.
Higher value, higher
and also the
that we are
creative
getting right
industries.
now. The
Design, yeah.
The health sector grew from 2010 to 2011, 172%. That's the demand for that year. That actually continued until 2012.
Well, any legislation then that should address education is
good,
almost
yeah.
directly
Yeah,
addressing, obviously, the issue of labor. Now, despite recent record-breaking GDP growth, there are always those things called inclusive growth
Yes.
or trickle-down effect. Your thoughts? Is that happening?
Well, actually, one of the things that we are trying to do is move most of the work outside of Metro Manila and spur countryside growth.
to the urbanized centers in the provinces.
Even to the second tier and third tier. So we're talking about Iloilo, Dumaguete, Bacolod, Baguio, those cities outside of Metro Cebu and Metro Davao as destinations for
Bicol,
BPO.
Nancy, gagaling nila mag-English. Better than Manila English.
In
Actually,
Bicol, Cebu, Very good English.
Actually, sir,
excellent. And in the mountain province, tinuruan ng mga misyonaryo. Ang galing ng English, talo yung mga Tagalog.
When
na
we did
mahirap.
the
Then
rate,
Raymond,
when we
it's
did
an
the rate,
yeah.
Baguio and Davao were better than Metro Manila.
When you did, I'm sorry, the what?
When we did a survey
Oh,
English
survey.
of
is
English.
galing, oh.
Well, you know what? That's an aberration then, because just because of their geographical
Kasi yata sa misyonaryo, pag di ka
location,
nag-English, di ka pupunta sa langit.
solve na pala tayo.
But we're actually seeing a lot of niches in the different cities. I mean,
What I'm saying is, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but there's an aberration because you mentioned that the rates are lower in the provinces, but that's not fair. If they're doing better in your ratings, then it should be reflected in their salaries.
well, the Metro Cebu, Metro Davao is pretty much the same.
Because
as
that's
Metro
first
Manila.
tier.
Yes.
But the second tier,
The second tier, there's still going to be some changes, but the difference is not that big. You know, it's not that big, and you know the savings that they'll get out of that smaller salary that they get is bigger actually in the provinces, in the second tier, third tier than the first tier.
all right. In other countries like the US, it has been observed that if there's a period of economic prosperity, the party or administration in power is a shoe-in for re-election. I mean, in the Philippines, is that even a dynamic? Do people even look at that, or is it more personality-driven, or are they looking at what programs there are for
Tinitingnan din
labor?
ng mga tao pag mataas ang presyo. Ang delikado sa Pinoy team, nagtaas ng presyo ang Meralco, nagtaas ng presyo ang tubig. Pag nagsama-sama yan by May, mayayari ang Pinoy team. Kasi aburido yung boboto on May, May 13 ba yan? May 10.
13.
13,
Oh, 13.
yes. Lucky 13.
Yeah.
You were going to say something, Stella.
Yeah, economic prosperity helps, but it's not sufficient. I mean, you can just think about what happened to GMA. During her time, macroeconomic indicators were pretty good. In fact, poverty incidence was relatively low. But then in 2004,
So the figures were true pala. Okay.
most of the admin candidates actually lost. So it helps, but
It's
not
also
sufficient,
irrational.
yeah.
That's all I have to say. It's a so-called political business cycle applicable to the Philippines. That is, that incumbent politicians or the administration will strive to stimulate the economy just to look more attractive.
Yeah, I mean, the
Does that
broad
happen
patterns
here?
would show that, yes, there seems
Dapat
to
the
be business
politicians
cycles.
hindi pakialaman ng economy.
Stay
Hindi
out
nila
of the way.
The more the politicians stop intervening or interfering with the economy.
Well,
In fact, this country will grow without the politicians.
You know what? I heard one key businessman here say, I said, do you like the way Pinoy is handling the economy? And he said, you know what? The mere fact that he stays out of the way is good enough for us because we've never really felt that in a long while. Agree?
In a sense, yung pagka-laid back niya, nakakatulong sa economy. Ako ang theory ko.
I know, even if he's a robot, he keeps saying
this
we would
country
grow.
will grow robustly, even if the president were a dog, a robot,
Or a piece of furniture.
non-existent. Yeah.
All right. There was a time when every economic downturn or economic negative issue was blamed on political noise. Do you think we've reached that level of democratic maturity, perhaps, that we tend to be Teflon already? I mean, even if there are rallies outside, the stock market still goes up. I mean, it's not the same as before. What changed?
Wow.
Deep ba?
Well, when we say, I can only speak of the industry itself, no. The people working in the industry are really serving the international market.
Okay.
So what really happens is that when they're serving the market, when they do the work for the markets that they serve, and they're okay.
So even if those foreign markets see some political noise, they don't care. They'll still send their back office operations here.
That's what we
Siyang
see.
big change.
Yes.
Big change. We have a president who does not steal. That is an endangered species in Philippine politics. For the first time, we can sell to the world a president who does not steal. Ang laking bagay yan sa mundo. Although sa
Diba?
Pilipino, hindi masyadong big deal yan .
Okay, very quickly, they're telling us we have a few moments left. Does politics influence business more than business influences politics?
Politics is a hindrance to the business. The less politics in business, the greater will be our business volume and value.
So the more politics, the
Stock market,
the less benefit to
naiintindihan
labor.
ng mga politician, except tumaya sila, sumasakay pataas. Dire-diretso ang taas. Walang politics . Pero you put up a road, you put up a bridge, you put up an airport, you put up a seaport, ang dami nakikickback, mga politician mostly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Stella, as
with
far as our discussion is focusing on labor, as far as labor is concerned, does politics influence business more than business influences politics?
Even, I suppose.
Even?
Yeah.
Okay, even.
Yeah, but I
Okay.
would agree with Tony. I mean, let the markets work. Politicians should just stay aside and just do
Alright.
everything they could to just
Yeah,
let the
I
markets
also
work
agree
properly.
with Tony, and that's what we're seeing also in the industry. It's really driven by business, and then the politics or the fiscal policies just support it.
Yeah.
All right.
Finally, about harnessing savings, hanggang ngayon wala pang internal rules and regulations dun sa REIT, saka dun sa
REITs.
retirement plan for workers. Sayang yun.
All right, those are
Yeah.
very specific
Oh,
areas
law
that
na yun
legislators should look at. All right, we're going to have to leave this
Yeah.
discussion at least for now. Thanks to our guests, UP School of Economics Professor Stella Kimbo, Tony Lopez, publisher of Biz News Asia, and Raymond Lacdao, consultant with the Business Process Outsourcing Association of the Philippines. And thank you all for joining us tonight. Tune in again next week as we make this vote count. I'm Nancy Irlanda, and this is Elections 2013.